Grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. Every fourth Sunday of Easter is designated sort of in popular naming Good Shepherd Sunday. It's always on this Sunday we have Psalm 23 appointed. Always the gospel is from a section of the 10th chapter of John. Always our music directors seem to drag up the shepherd hymns, and we sing those as well. So it becomes very much a thematic summary of Christ as the Good Shepherd. One of the things that I do occasionally to sort of try and figure out where contemporary culture is to go on Google and do a simple search. And I'll do it not in the text, but in the images. And so I did that as I was preparing the sermon for this Sunday, trying to sort of get a handle on where we are in our modern culture about thinking of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So I typed in the string Good Shepherd Contemporary, and a whole host of images came out. Most of them were sort of a Jesus that was smiling or laughing and a lamb or a small sheep either on his shoulders or held up next to him. And they were kind of leaning into each other and looked at sort of very cuddly and adorable picture. And, you know, I get that. I get that we want to see Jesus that way. We want to see ourselves as being cuddled and adored by God. But really, as we get into this text, it goes much deeper than that. And I don't mean to belittle those who find that image comforting. There are times in all of our lives when we are overwhelmed and we feel as though we really do need something far bigger than us to lean on and to give us comfort. But this image over here comes from a building in Ravenna, which is just outside of Venice. Ravenna was the retreat for the Western Roman emperors in the 4th and 5th centuries. And this comes from the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, which is where the last couple of Roman emperors were buried before the western part of the empire fell to the Goths in the 470s or so. So this is just a couple of decades before the fall of Western Christianity. And it has the picture of Christ, the Good Shepherd, and it's a very different kind of a picture from what we think of when we think of the Good Shepherd ourselves. This figure is rather regal, and you'll notice that all the sheep are looking to the central figure for guidance, almost as though this Jesus figure is the core and the center of their life, and they do nothing without him. Now, I get this, that this is a mosaic in an imperial mausoleum. And so it does have overtones of imperial theology there, but actually this mosaic is much closer to the intent of what we see in John 10 than our contemporary images are. If you really take a closer look at the language in Greek of John 10, when it comes to that point where Jesus says, I am the Good Shepherd, there's actually a better translation for that. What Jesus is really saying is, I am the noble shepherd. And that sort of jives much more closely with this picture here. When we think of shepherds, especially in the New Testament, we think about Luke, and Luke's sort of exposition of what shepherds are as people who live out in the fields, people who are grimy, people who are not allowed in polite society, people who are considered unclean by the religious authorities because they live out in the fields. But when you say noble shepherd, that raises the image to a whole different level. And we begin to think of maybe David and his kingship as the shepherd king, maybe learning what it is to care for his family's wealth by caring for the sheep. And then as he becomes king, at least so the royal theologians of the house of Judah would have us believe, that David ruled the kingdom of Israel as though he was a shepherd taking care of the sheep. And from that point within Israel, the metaphor of shepherd always had to do with leadership. If you look at Ezekiel 34, that whole chapter right there is a critique of the religious authorities and their leadership, good or ill, and what it is supposed to be. And so when you think of the noble shepherd, one of the phrases that comes to my mind is the modern phrase in French, noblesse oblige, which roughly translates as nobility has obligations. Nobility isn't just for nobility's sake. The person who is noble has authority and power does not have power to exercise for their own ends, but holds that power and authority in trust. Hold on to that thought. John, at least the first part of John, has a very repetitious cycle for the way it evolves. John will talk about Jesus performing a sign. And then people will respond to that sign, either for or against. And then they'll get confused and Jesus has to explain the sign. And so this cycle goes over a number of chapters and then it repeats itself again. John 10, where Jesus talks about being the shepherd and talks about the shepherd imagery, and talks about the sheepfold, is the discourse, is the explanation for what goes on in the previous chapter, which is John 9. Now, those of you who remember as far back as Lent, we did talk about what happened in John 9. That is the story of the man who was born blind. And that is a story that really has two themes, or two sort of storylines running through it. One storyline is the one that follows the man who was born blind, and it's a story of how he eventually comes to faith, from blindness to sight, and seeing Jesus as the person who becomes the one who defines his life. The other storyline that story follows is that of the Pharisees, who are running around Jerusalem trying to find out with an inquisition who healed the man born blind. And as they go on this inquisition, they get more and more convinced in themselves that the person who did this it cannot possibly be a person of God. Jesus is nowhere in that story, and was at the beginning until the end. And then when Jesus finally appears at the end and encounters the man born blind, after he has been excommunicated, there is this juxtaposition of the beginning of the story and the end of the story. Remember, at the beginning of the story, the disciples asked the question, who sinned that this man was born blind? And at the end of the story, Jesus says to the Pharisees, because you say you know what the will of God is, you are sinners and you are blind. Then this dialogue about the Good Shepherd follows. And really it's a critique about the leadership of the religious elite in Jerusalem. And Jesus begins to describe them as thieves and robbers. And again, our translation is very mild. The word used for robbers there is lestes in Greek. And it describes a personality that is utterly chaotic and totally given over to violence and rape. It's a huge indictment against the religious elite, the rulers in Jerusalem. And he even goes so far as to say in this metaphor that the sheep do not listen to your voice. He even says to them that the people know you're frauds. It goes on and on and on and disabuses them of their leadership. Then Jesus comes in with the more positive metaphors that he is the gatekeeper. He is the one who prevents the robbers and the thieves from getting in to molest the sheep and use the sheep for their own ends. He is the one who leads the sheep out to good pasture. He is the one whose sheep hear his voice and recognize it. And there is a wonderful little piece at the end of John in the story of the resurrection that sort of reprises this chapter. The resurrection story of John is very much like John 9. There's a lot of running around back and forth with Jesus at the beginning being raised and only at the end being discovered. People trying to figure out what happened to the body, just like the Pharisees were running around Jerusalem trying to figure out who healed the blind man. And then there was this moment when we know Jesus has been walking around the garden, when Mary Magdalene encounters him and he mistakes him for the gardener. And Jesus says, Mary. Says her name. all of a sudden, she realizes it's not the gardener, it's her risen Lord. My sheep, hear my voice. I call them by name. It is a beautiful resolution to this chapter. And really, when it gets down to it, what Jesus is saying is there are different kinds of leadership. There is the leadership that is self-serving, that sacrifices others, and will always end in violence and death and killing. And then there is a different kind of leadership, the leadership of the noble shepherd, that is self-sacrificial, that sees to the needs of others and always ends in life in all of its abundance. And certainly that was good news to the community of John. Certainly those folks were people who, like the man born blind, were disenfranchised, who were kicked out of the synagogue, kicked out of their family. There is a ritual that still exists today in certain sects of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, that when one person leaves the community, even for a more liberal branch of Judaism, a funeral service is conducted for them, and a little casket is buried symbolically. They are dead. And in the first century, if you experienced that, if your family considered you dead, you had no economic resources whatsoever, because it was all in the family. Business was all in the family. There was no free labor market like we have now. And so the first century Christians heard this story as a great story of hope, as a great story of care, that Jesus is our noble shepherd. But here we are 20 centuries later. We are not disenfranchised folk. We have self-determination. Even though the church is not what it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago in society, we still have resources and we can still do good. And so this story is more about us and our leadership. And how will we be leaders within our community? What kind of leadership will we be exemplifying? A week and a half ago, I went to a conference on stewardship in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that they kept sort of pounding again and again and again as a mantra was, people don't give to budgets. People give to causes. And then they paused and asked, what is your church's cause? What is our church's cause? What are we known for? What is it about us that stands out amongst the rest of our community as being who we are? What we are recognizably for, what we seek to transform or build. And I think those things kind of come and go in phases. Maybe a couple of years ago we could have said, well, we were the church that really brought the House of Neighborly Service into being. But in the meantime, other organizations and other folks have come along and they've become much more the drivers of that organization than us. And so I ask the question again, what is our cause? What are we here for? How do we lead? What way are we self-sacrificial for others to create abundant life among us? This text, at least as I read it and where I am in my life journey, is certainly challenging me and maybe the rest of us to ask that question again. What is our cause? What is that great thing that we can all aspire to? And I'm thinking about mission. I know in our mission committee there are a number of people who are saying that we need to have a unified mission again as a congregation, and I fully agree. But why stop at 1 month? Why not create a mission that we can all gather around as a congregation and sustain for a year, maybe 2 years? And that's aside from our monthly mission, not instead of. But something that we can go at to such an extent that we take our church and the issue that we're addressing to a whole new level that will change and transform lives in significant ways. And it's that could be a domestic violence shelter. Is that maybe a community of habitat houses? Is that maybe building a new lodge over at Dew Point? I don't know. But I do know. We are being called to greatness. We are being called to nobility. We are being called as a church to step up in a way that is identifiably self-sacrificial and life-giving for our community. As followers of the Good Shepherd, the noble shepherd, can we do no less?